the fun bit with the Vox Lynx, pulling the frets out. Now this has turned out to be easier than I thought. So when I was started off, I did the first couple off camera just in case I messed it up. Never done this before, but what I was doing was using my soldering iron to heat it up. Sometimes if they're glued in you need to heat them up to get the glue off, but it seems that this one doesn't have any glue on. It's pretty difficult to get a grip on the fret. There's a bit of build-up of gunk. The first one I had to sort of get a knife out and clean down the edges. So let's see if I can just pull this one straight out. Once you get a good grip on them, they've just been coming out, so I figure there's no glue. Let's see. So I just got it started for you off cam, well, with me in the way really, because I just couldn't get it from that angle, but you can see I've kind of got the corner coming up. Now hopefully I can pull the rest out fairly gently. It comes out quite easy. And what's quite interesting about these, let me just find where you are. They haven't trimmed the tang on them, which means they're actually fairly tight. They don't go over the binding, you can see. So when I refret this, what I'm going to do is cut the tang and go over there, give me a little bit more fret. Might make it a little bit more playable too. Also I found there was a shim in this neck. I think what happens with these Vox Lynx is because there's no center block, I think the top piece of the body curves in slightly, and then you've got a very high pickup to get over. I'll just show you that. Look at the body, you can see that I think what happens is this part of the hollow body sort of bends in over time. And this is quite a high pickup for the strings to get over, if you can imagine that fastened in there. So it'd be about that height, not a lot of clearance, so I'm going to try and shim it quite a lot, see if I can get this guitar really playable. Okay, so I'll be back when I come to start cutting some frets to size, and you see how I got on, see if I've ripped any big shreds out of this guitar. Okay, cool. I've got all the frets out now. Came out fairly easily once you got over being a bit too gentle. I think that's like a lot of jobs on these things. You start off tickling it, you don't want to do any harm, but I think sometimes you just have to go for it. I've left the 0 fret in now. We'll see if this is a mistake or not, but it looks awkward to get out without changing the nut, which is one thing. Also, I didn't want to buy more fret wire, and the fret wire I've bought is lower than this, and I could always just stone in a little bit more if it were not low enough. We will see how that works out. The fret wire I think is a little bit lower than what was on, so that should work out okay. So a couple of things I've got to do. Obviously I've got to sand this now before I start thinking about putting on new frets, but also some of these inlays are a little bit prone. You can feel them under your fingers there. This one's actually, I don't know if you can see, but this one's actually loose. So I'm either going to try and prise that out, hopefully without breaking the, I'll have to see about that, or try and get some glue down the side of that. I'm not sure yet. I'm going to have a look at that now. Then I'm going to try and carefully sand these down without sanding the wood. I guess I can mask them off to some degree, possibly. And then once I've got them reasonably level, I'm going to sand the whole thing with this block. This is a 12 radius fingerboard, so I've got my 12 radius sanding block. we'll give that a good going over. It should be great. This Kiridashi is coming very useful as well for cleaning down the side of the frets where it's hard to get the pullers in sometimes. Okay, cool. Aha, managed to pull a little inlay out with the Kiridashi blade. It's quite handy. I don't think the other ones need pulling out. I think they're actually fixed, but just slightly prone or have worn slower. Some of it is here, there's quite a bit of wear. Could be that maybe it's worn around, but I think it's probably most likely they were just not laid that great in the first place. So I'm going to clean this little hole out there, clean this off a bit, and then lay it back in. Now I think what I'm going to do with this inlay, even when this is stuck in, it's a little bit high, so I mean I need to rough up the back anyway to glue it, so I'm going to get a bit of sanding paper and I'm going to just rub it down from that back side a little bit, like I said, just to rough it up so the glue takes a little better, and also you know, just to lower it a little bit. I sanded it down a little bit, the inlay, and I've put it in, and I've just clamped it. This is really light, it's not damaging the wood at all, it's just to hold that in place for about 5 minutes while the glue sets. While that still sort of drying, that inlay, what I'm going to do is, before I sand it, might as well just take some of this dirt off. I'm just going to use lighter fluid and give it a bit of a scrub down in here. No point me sanding dirt and sanding it into the holes, so I'm just going to clean this up while I'm waiting. So what I did was I sort of covered these and sanded them a bit to get them a little bit more flush. It's quite hard to do, require quite a lot of sanding. Now what I'm doing is I'm just going over the whole neck with this 12-inch radius block with sandpaper on. You can see I've already done quite a bit. You can also see how this bit is, I guess, was low to the rest of the fingerboard. I don't know if that's to do with how much or how little care they took when they did these things, but I think they were knocked up pretty quickly. And relatively speaking, they were quite inexpensive, but they were expensive for the day. They were probably a couple of weeks' wages. So I'm going to give this another going over with this. It's 400 grit, and then I'm going to go 600, and then yeah, that should probably be enough actually. But we'll see how we get on. I'm going to give this a bit more of a going over. Maybe I'll do. Maybe I'm going to actually go down a lower grit and maybe try 240. Incidentally, in case you're interested how I stuck this, all I did, put some single-sided tape there, and then I used a like Pritt stick style glue stick, and then just stick the paper on. Seems to work pretty good. So, okay. So, this is all sanded down now. I'm not going to attempt to sand out these, it would just be too deep. And they kind of give a character, but I did want it to play better than it actually did. These were a bit sticking out a little bit, and actually from about here the finish was pretty rough. I don't suppose they cared that much. Who was playing down here in the 60s, I don't know, or up here rather, at the dusty end. So actually, after a bit of 600 grit and then cleaning off with some lighter fluid and a rag, I think this is smoother than it's ever been. The next job is to actually clean these frets out before I attempt to put clean out these fret slots before I attempt to put new frets in. So for that I'm going to use this tool, which is a special saw for going into pre-existing frets and cleaning them out, and then sort of pulling sort of dead dust or particles or chips or whatever out. So hopefully you can see that. I'll just bring it up a little bit to the camera, but the idea is that you go in, we clean up, and then we can pull it out of there like that. A little bit difficult when I'm holding both. Anyway, I'll be back with you when this is done.